Well, hello again, Jonathan Doyle with you. I hope you had a chance to see the first video in this 2-video sequence of live sessions that I recently recorded with the Archdiocese of St. Louis. In this second video, we're going to go deep into some of the practices and strategies that can really help you to flourish as a Catholic educator. So I'd love to know what you think, so please feel free to leave a comment. But for now, sit back, relax, and enjoy video 2 in this 2-video sequence for the Archdiocese of St. Louis. There is a theory that poets and speakers often only ever have one idea. They just spend 30 or 40 years saying it different ways. So I'm not fancy, this is all I have. And I just want to be really careful that you're hearing me correctly, because I've got to say this so carefully as a visitor. But the genius of the United States as an outside observer is the power of that rugged individualism, that amazing founding story. But last night I'm sitting in the hotel, I was going to say praying, but I was watching NFL Network while working. And you hear them talking, you know, like about work. I work. And it's a truth, right? It's a partial truth. Because we're active participants in this creation. But I think what can happen is that we can tilt the scales and go a little Pelagian. A little neo-Pelagian. A little bit like, well, we just got to hustle. We just got to push. So I'm offering you a both and. I'm offering you an elevation thesis that he will take everything that's best in you and elevate it. But you're going to have to take a risk. And all of you are so different here based on your family histories, your psychology, your pain or your wounds that you carry. Some of you, the risk... My mother, right? She's 80. She's an amazing woman. She's got a childlike faith. If she was sitting here, she'd be like going, like, really? Are we done? Because it's simple for her. But for some of us, it's much harder to take the risk of really trusting God. So what should we do? So the smartest thing you can do as a Catholic speaker is to let the gospel prove or disprove your thesis. So what I want to do is ask a question here, which is, why don't we look in the Gospels to discover what people in a kind of similar situation encountered with Christ? What do I mean by that? Well, not every single person that Jesus encounters in the Gospel, but most of them are hanging on by their fingertips. Example, you look at the woman at the well in John 5. Just a little thing, you know. Remember the woman comes to the well. Well, she didn't come at 6 in the morning, did she? Why not? You see, you would go to the well, most of you would know this, right? You would go to the well at 5 or 6 a.m. Why? Because it was cool. And all the women would go together. It was a very social thing. They'd all go to the well in the cool of the day. But she doesn't go in the cool of the day. And she doesn't go with the other women. And they're really interesting points. Why was she going in the hottest part of the day? And why was she alone? Because she was a social outcast. So whatever game she might have wanted to play for acceptance, belonging, connection, success, she couldn't play. But then you go to John 8 with the woman caught in adultery, and it's just kind of maxed out even further. It's like somebody who is just completely in a situation where nothing is going to work. And then you think of people with leprosy, right? Because remember, with leprosy, it was just like any skin disease. It was basically seen as a sign of major sin in your family. So there was the social pariah status, but the suffering and the fact that you probably couldn't even see your own children or your own family. So I'm trying to help you understand that he keeps encountering these people who are holding on. Now, there are some of you in the room who feel a little bit of that. Maybe it's in your work, maybe it's in your marriage, maybe it's in your parenting. But we're just holding on. And what tends to happen is this. most of them had probably tried to work out some system of self-salvation. Some of them had probably tried to work out a strategy, the woman at the well, strategy to make life work. But it's not working still. So this brings me back to that strategy piece, right? State, story, strategy. And you might sit there and go, well, look, it's working. Our school's doing well. It can do so much better. Even if it's doing awesome, God's not done. He's never done. You understand? He's never, ever done. He's never like, oh, that's finished. Take a break. It's never done. There's always more. So they tried to work out a system of self-salvation. It hadn't worked. And then there is what? There is a moment of encounter. And every time that encounter with Jesus happens, there is profound transformation. This is what we would call a biblical hermeneutic. It's a way of seeing the structure of the Gospels. Clinging on, pushing every strategy button you can, not working, encounter, transformation. That's the hermeneutic. And I would just offer the question, why would we think we are any different? So I want to give you an example of this. I want to show you a really short little video clip. And I'm going to preface it by saying it messes me up every single time I see it. I like to think of myself as a man's man. I make beer. I watch NFL Network in hotel rooms. So I think of myself, and I praise God for the gift of masculinity. I love being, but this thing wrecks me every time. Because what you're about to see, many of you will have seen it, but I want you to see it again, because what you're about to see is the absolute dynamic I'm talking about. You're going to see somebody who's been running a really ineffective strategy for a very long time. And then you are going to see encounter, and then you will see transformation. So, Jill, I don't know if we've got easy light switches around here to kill, but if not, hopefully we can still see it. So it'll be on the other screens too. Let's see what happens.
Fine. She smells anyway.
I don't know what else I can do to help you.
Give me that. Lots of it.
That's not going to solve your problems. It's meant to distract from
No
them.
more preaching. Just give it to me.
Lilith, please listen to what I'm saying.
I said leave me.
It's not for you.
Don't touch me.
Lily. Lily, are you okay?
I have to go. Leave me alone. Leave me alone.
Mary! Mary of Magdala.
Who are you? How do you know my name?
Thus says the Lord who created you, and he who formed you. Fear not, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name. You are mine.
So every time we watch that at home, my kids are like, "Are you all right, Dad?" I'm like, "Just dust. It's just dust in my eye. I'm fine." It's like, it's all there, right? Like, you see the strategy. And then you see the presence of Christ, but she still is, "Leave me alone. Let me go back to my strategy. Let me go back to the only thing I know that has ever worked for me." But he won't let her go. And there is that moment of encounter, and as we know from her story, of profound transformation. And she goes on to be one of the great saints in the early church, and why do we think we're any different? I mean, honestly, it's a question. Why do we think we're different? And our strategies will run from all sorts of different things, some better, some worse, but it's the same process. And what we see is the encounter leads to vocation. Just to do this very simply, that the encounter with Christ leads to a sense of calling, because Christ encounters Mary of Magdala and calls her into relationship, vocare, vocation, to call out, to call forth, to call her, which then leads to missio Dei, which leads to mission, and the mission leads to sanctification. We become holy through the mission. So this is the dynamic that you're called into as well. The encounter with Christ at some point in your life leads to some sense of vocation, and vocation leads to a sense of mission, of going out, because Christ never calls anyone ever and says, "Hey, come here and just sit down." You see it all through the Old Testament too. You see Moses is called out of Egypt and sent back to Egypt. All the prophets are constantly called and sent, called and sent. So you are, I believe, deeply caught up in this same great metaphysical, existential reality. So what do we actually do? All right, really quickly now, I'm going to hustle here. We've got to be finished by 5. So it's now 1. Jill's still smiling. When she stops, I'll be like, someone hit the fire alarm. Okay, what do we actually do? So what I'm about to say, some of you have heard me say this in 2017. I'm about to say something to you. I mean it with every ounce of my being. I am not trying to be metaphorical, funny, or interesting. I'm about to tell you exactly what you need to do. Everybody in the room simply needs to do one thing and one thing only. Each of you just needs to become a saint. Now here's another really important question. Did everyone just hear the noise then? Yeah? You all heard it? It's the same from Tasmania to Iceland to London, because I've heard it in every room around the world. And here's a question. Why did we just laugh? That's a good question. When I say you need to become a saint, there's this kind of nervous laughter. Why? Because Pelagianism isn't the only heresy, right? The other heresy is that saints are these mystical beings that are made in a factory in heaven. They roll out on a conveyor belt. They land in cribs like this. They say thou, and they end up in stained glass. And for most of you here, that doesn't sound too exciting. And most of you here, God bless you, and I say this with great affection, are at some level perhaps holding on to the heresy that you could never be one. I think it was Paul Blondel, the French philosopher, who said that the only great suffering in life, the only irredeemable loss, is not to be a saint. You're looking at me strange here. You're going, yeah, I don't know. So I want to give it some magisterial backing. Second Vatican Council. Big moment here. It's called the Universal Call to Holiness. A little bit before the Vatican Council, there was kind of this idea that popes and maybe cardinals could become saints, but never the punters in the pews. So the Vatican Council changed that. I'll just let you look at that just for a second. the universal, Catholicos, everyone. You are called to holiness. And I don't know what that means to you, right? Because you're like, what does that mean? You want to be real pious? No. Doesn't... The church is calling us to be saints. What does it mean to be a saint? We could talk for hours, but I think it kind of partially means this, to want one thing, a unification of desire, that the modality of your life, the way that you do life, is that you go through your life desiring one thing. What is the one thing that is worth desiring? Whatever He wants. To want what He wants. You see, I know that God wants me to love Karen. I know that He has sacramentally called me to do that in my weakness and my failings, but by His grace I have got better and better at it, and I ain't done yet. He wants me to want what He wants. He wants me to make up in this generation of parenting what was missing in my own. I want what He wants. And so I try to do things and think things and believe things and do practical things with my physical body sacramentally, like the Mass, because I want what He wants. Now, I don't know if I'll ever get there, but I just increasingly want what He wants, because I spent many years wanting what I want and it wasn't working, so I just woke up and tried something else by His grace. It is not an abstract theoretical principle. This is from Pope Benedict. It's a love story. Every one of you in this room at some time has fallen in love. Every single one of you has at some point in your life more than likely walked around a corner one day and gone, damn, they're fine. And you remember when you had a crush or you really liked somebody, might have been in high school. I mean, I feel this every day in my marriage. I can't talk for you, but you remember that feeling. What did you want? Well, you just wanted to be with them, right? Wherever they were. They could be visiting a sewage factory and you'd be like, I'm coming. Like wherever they were, you wanted to be. You wanted to be with them. It's an event. This desire for Christ, this desire for God, it begins to permeate your days and you begin to walk through life a little bit differently, and it will change your leadership and change your presidency and your principalship, because you will just have a different filter. One of the great giants of the faith, one of the absolute lions of the faith, puts it this way. So how do you do it? Just really quickly, because I want to be respectful of time. St. Thomas Aquinas, right, the angelic doctor, arguably the greatest theologian in Christian history, was asked the question, how do you become a saint? Now this is the guy that's written the Summa, right? He's written the Summa Theologiae, 83 volumes. So when you ask St. Thomas, how do you become a saint? It's going to be a little more than a book report. But you know what he did? It's so cool. This is so cool. 2 words. 2 words. What were the 2 words? Will it. Desire it. I don't want you to go home today thinking, that's a good speaker, he was all right. If I had to listen to someone, he was okay. I am trying to change the trajectory of your life today, here, in real time. Well, God's trying to do it. I'm just trying to keep out of the way. Will it. Just desire it. As preposterous as it may sound to you, desire it. Just say, Lord, I'm never telling anyone. You don't have to tell a soul. Just go home today and go, Lord, I ain't going to tell a soul, but you know what? It sounds kind of interesting. I'd like to be a saint. And one of your kids will be like, was that you? No, nothing. I said nothing. Now, just quickly, I often share another story, but I wanted to share with you just a very quick story to help you understand that you're no longer allowed to think that saints are these remarkable people. They're not ontologically different to you. Example. This is a painting that hangs in the provincial house of the Maris brothers in Sydney. It's a painting of what is known as the Montagna Incident. That is Marcelin Champagne, the founder of the Marists. If you're not familiar with his story, he was, I'll say this nicely, a big, dumb French farm boy. He failed seminary 3 times. Why? He was at the pub. I once worked with a principal, a Maris brother, who had a doctorate in Champagne's story, so I learned this story really closely. Everyone loved him. He was a big, strapping country guy, the kind of guy everyone had fun with, but just not the sharpest tool in the shed. Failed seminary 3 times. Finally, they took pity on him and he got through. And the morning after his ordination, he and a bunch of other newly ordained priests and religious sisters went to the top of a hill in the French town of Fouvier. It's called Fouvier Hill. And professed that they would form a little company together called Maryists to be focused on Mary. Most of them never saw each other again. They were all sent to different villages in the middle of nowhere. He ends up in a remote French village with a much older priest who was getting ready to retire, and they get on really well. Everyone loved him. He was a lot of fun. He was a great young priest. One day, there's a massive thunderstorm, and then it's midnight, and there's a knock on his door. And he opens the door and there's some people from a neighbouring village 6 miles away. And they said, "We're really sorry, but our priest is away. There's this young boy, he's really ill. Could you come and see him?" So Champagne puts on a coat, walks 6 miles through a thunderstorm in the French countryside, gets to this little house, opens the door, goes inside, sits down, and spends some time with this little boy called Jacques Montagna. But Champagne can tell it's very serious. And towards dawn, he says these words to the boy. They're in his journals. He says to the boy, "You will not live to see the dawn. You must prepare yourself to meet God." And then the boy says something very, very important to him. Listen carefully. The boy looks up at Champagne and whispers these words. "What is God?" He doesn't say who. Post-French Revolution, where the streets of Paris had been soaked with the blood of thousands of priests and religious, so it was very possible for people to grow up in rural post-revolutionary France and not see a priest and literally hear nothing of the love of God for them. Nothing. And then is it not true that you have some students in a kind of similar position perhaps, right? Like in the sense of never really having the chance to have heard about the love of God for them maybe? Jacques Montagna dies before dawn. And in his journals, Champagne describes walking back through those French fields at dawn, sobbing and saying to himself over and over again the same word. I mean, imagine seeing a little child just die. And Champagne says to himself over and over these words, "Never again, never again, never again, never again." He's like, whatever happens, no child should ever die without knowing of the love of God. So then this big dumb French farm boy gets together with a couple of other, one of the first friars had a major intellectual disability. And they start this tiny little group and it grows and it grows and it grows and it's all over the world and it's reached millions of young men and women. But the point I want you to understand is, do you see the material that God was working with? He wasn't getting a doctorate at the Sorbonne. He was simple. He was like us. And what happened? He just went, "I want you, and I want you to use me." See, saints, that's it. That's all it is. It's just, I want you, and I want you to use me. So what do we actually do? This is a cool part to finish. Cool, to finish. So that's the theoretical, right? So you can leave here today going, how do you transform your principalship and leadership? Well, it's a decision to move away from any form of Pelagianism into a deeper encounter of abandonment with Christ in every single aspect of your ministry. Nothing is to escape it. Nothing. No meeting, no strategy, no conversation, no pastoral activity. Everything is infused with Christ. Lord, what do you want? What do you want? So I'm going to give you, I think, about 5 things to do. If you're taking notes, they're very simple. What do you do? The first thing you do is you understand that from this day forward, the answer, the way, will always and only ever be a person. The way, if you're writing notes, I just say it like this: the way is a person. The way, how do you lead your school? Oh, you want to know the way to do that? It's really simple. The way is a person. Oh, that's abstract. Oh, seriously, in the real details of my school day, oh yeah, and I'm dead serious. It's called the Gospels. And if you begin to know those Gospels and know the Christ in those Gospels, it will change your thinking and you will operate differently over time. The way is a person. And that is not just me telling you that. Why? Because he told us that himself. He did not say, I am the abstract metaphysical principle of reality. He did not say, I am the progenitor of all forms of pastoral strategy. He just simply said, I am the way and the truth and the life. But he told us he's the way. So let's not make it complicated. He's the way. How do I love Karen? Well, I tell you, on retreat during our courtship, the monk who later became the bishop was the spiritual director for both of us. And he said something to us that I've never forgotten. He said, the quality of your marriage will be in direct proportion to the quality of your individual relationship with Christ. Never forgot it. The quality of your principalship will be in direct proportion to the quality of your relationship with Christ. And you might be sitting there going, but what about non-Christian principals who do a great job? Well, the answer to that is in the opening scenes of the first Top Gun movie, where Tom Skerritt welcomes them to Miramar, and he famously says to them, you guys are good. We'll make you better. So when anybody says, well, what about non-Christian principles? You go, well, they're good, but can you imagine what they would be like with Christ? The way is a person. Principle 2, the path of dependence. The path of dependence. I would like you to think about moving the axis point of your life to less self-reliance toward a modality of genuine dependence on Christ. Now, I learned that on the stage at the St. Louis Convention Centre, but it took 30 years of suffering. You can just learn it today for free. Just bypass all the bad parts. You're welcome. Go for dependence. Got a tough meeting coming up? Lord, so out of my depth. No idea what I'm going to say to these parents. None. I would like some help. Pray. Seek Him. Become completely dependent. Third step, I want to talk to you about something very, very important, because I think it is the most misunderstood and, if I could be honest, the most avoided of the strategies of encounter leading to joy, and it is the primacy of prayer. When I say prayer, a whole bunch of different responses in the room. Some of you just went, if you have any idea how busy I am. Peter Kreeft says it really beautifully. He says, lack of prayer is the cause of lack of time. Lack of prayer is the cause of lack of time. So most of us are like, I'm so busy, I got my kids, I got my this, I got that, I got the school. Hey, you want me to just pray? Yes. Because what Kreeft is trying to tell us here is that as you move into a deeper spiritual life, a reorientation of priorities will take place. And the Holy Spirit will guide and prompt you into using the hours that are given to you in specific ways. The prayer thing is difficult for a lot of people. There's a beautiful poem from Yeats, William Butler Yeats, which many of you will know. You may have heard this part, listen carefully. Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart, the centre cannot hold, mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. Listen to that line, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. It's a beautiful poetic image. This falcon is there screaming, yelling in the sky, just crying out, but it cannot hear the voice of the falconer. It cannot land, it cannot return. Which is my way of saying to you that in modernity, the busyness, the noise, the chaos make it very hard to hear a God who really wants to talk to you. So this is about as Pelagian as we're going to have to get today. We are going to have to do things in the real physical world to embed ourselves here in an encounter. This one, friends, I'll be honest with you, it is not optional. I don't want anybody to be thinking, yeah, well, Jonathan, I've never been a real prayer. I've never really... It's so important. Now, these are some quotes, two very simple quotes from Pope Benedict about the heresy of what John Paul II referred to as activism. And that heresy affects a lot of good Christians, which is, I'm doing such important pastoral work that I can't really be any kind of contemplative or pray because I've got this pastoral work. I've got to be at the school at this time and I'm serving the Lord. I'm doing His will by being really active. Now, I didn't make this a heresy. John Paul II pointed to it. And listen to what Pope Benedict has to say. This one's really simple. One sentence, he says, all, he doesn't say some, all methods are empty without the foundation of prayer. That's the Pope. And Benedict's arguably one of the greatest intellects of the last 500 years. All methods are empty without the foundation of prayer. 2, it is time, he says in Deus Caritas Est, it is time, we'll get these quotes to you if you need them, it is time to reaffirm the importance of prayer in the face of the activism and the growing secularism of many Christians engaged in charitable work. He's speaking to us. He's saying, yes, yes, be pastoral, yes, be active in ministry, yes, serve young people, but you've got to have this foundation. We're talking about encounter. We have to encounter Him here. And what better way to understand the importance of prayer than to talk about beer? Again, one more time. I just want to tell you something. I hope this was the Holy Spirit to help you understand the importance of prayer. When we made beer a few weeks ago, anyone made beer here before? Okay, look at this. All right, good. You put all the ingredients together and you have to have this very special yeast, and the yeast goes in and you make it all together, and then there's an airlock on the top. You can just probably see it there. There's this airlock. And then you take it downstairs and we had to wrap it in sleeping bags. That's how much we love beer. Because it's got to be at the right temperature, and if it's the wrong temperature, so you've got to monitor it and you've got to talk to it and stroke. No, you don't do that. All right. And so what you're waiting for, the guys at the brew shop said, it's about 2 days, because you understand fermentation, it's a chemical reaction between the live, yeast is a live thing, reacting with the sugar content, which creates fermentation. And then after 2 days, the fermentation gas starts to come through the airlock. And you're looking at me now going, what does this possibly have to do with prayer? I'm going to land this plane, I promise. So I would sneak downstairs every few hours. I'd just be like, nothing, go back upstairs, come back down. And then it happened. Glug, 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 glug. Glug, 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 glug. That wasn't me drinking it, that was the gas coming up through the airlock. And the fermentation's happening. And here's what I thought. Prayer you bring together specific ingredients, place, time, a disposition of heart, and this combination of ingredients takes time. But if you give it the time that it needs, something magnificent is created that is more than the sum of the parts. That's a long stretch metaphor, right? But we bring together the ingredients of time, of place, and something extraordinary begins to happen. This is why I want you to pray. I'm almost done. This is why I want you to pray. What I keep finding is that I have made this a central thing in my life now for decades. It has been a non-negotiable. Young children, travel schedule, speaking, business, complexity. I do a huge amount of exercise. Let's be honest, you can't look like this without working at it. And every morning, this one is central for me. Non-negotiable. And what happens when you pray is over time, you get insights and promptings and dispositions of heart that shape things for you. Example, so last week I was in Melbourne in Australia. There's a stunning cathedral there. I go into the cathedral, I'm sitting there, I'm going, Lord, just give me something for this next talk in St. Louis. Give me some stuff. Literally, it was like a download. It was just like, now this, now this, now this. This is what I got in prayer. Point number 1, become a profligate time waster. Learn to waste time with God. Become a profligate, unrepentant time waster. In a culture that is all about immediacy and busyness and stress and strain, run the other direction. Become a profligate time waster. He asked me to tell you, he said, you will get it all back in eternity anyway. Really, he said that. I'm sitting there, I'm going, Lord, really? I'm just writing this. You get it all back. Make a revolutionary decision to be a profligate time waster. Waste time with Him and be unrepentant about it. If this helps you, because if you're still sitting there going, you don't know how busy I am, you have no idea, this is a lovely idea, but it's a sentiment, I couldn't possibly do it. Try this filter. See your time in prayer not as an extravagance, but as a way to love and serve people. If that helps you. If you go, I'm so busy, I'm a principal, I'm a president, I'm a priest, I'm a monsignor, I'm an archbishop, I'm so busy. Just go, you're not being selfish, it's not extravagant, it is a way to love people. So I get up every morning at 4 a.m. I'm just a morning guy, always have been. I got a little prayer space that I built. I go down every single morning. I pray the divine office. Why? Because I'm really holy and pious? No, because I want to be grounded in the heart of the church. It gives me structure and familiarity, and it means that the first thing out of my mouth every single day of my life is the praise of God. So I fell asleep last night with jet lag at 3:30 in the morning. I woke up at 6 today. First thing out of my mouth was the office, just praying that, not to impress you, not to make me look like I'm anything that I'm not. But after I pray the office at home, I pray the rosary. I didn't come from a Marian background. I'm not trying to be holy, but I pray for people. I pray for my children. I pray for you. I pray because it's a way to love my family. So friends, I want to encourage you into this encounter of prayer, not as an extravagance, as a way to love people. It is a necessity. We're almost done. A quote from the saints, because I constantly want to give you background and validation for this. This is from Alphonsus Liguori. This is really cool. Please listen carefully. He says, acquire the habit of speaking to God as if you were alone with Him. Familiarly and with confidence and love, as to the dearest and most loving of friends, speak to Him often. Listen. He says, speak to Him. You speak to God of what? Of your business, your plans, your troubles, your fears, of everything that concerns you. Do you do that? I mean, I don't know how many of you, do you actually do that? Do you spend any time in a day going, Lord, just tell Him the truth? He knows it anyway. He will not be shocked. He will not be, you did what? Not going to happen. Finishes with this. Converse with Him confidently and frankly. This last line is beautiful. For God is not likely to speak to a soul that does not speak to Him. Tell him the truth. I'm worried about this meeting. I'm worried about this staff member. I don't know what to do. Since I learned this quote, if you walk past my house sometimes, I go to bed really early, and sometimes I just lie there and speak out loud. And I hope no one hears me, but I just actually pray out loud. This morning in the hotel room, I'm praying, I'm saying, Lord, please, help me be just what they need today, no more, no less. Keep me out of the way. I talk out loud to him, almost done. The other thing about this prayer is that it is going to help you, how do I say this really nicely? It's going to help you see some of the stuff in yourself that you haven't been seeing. You see, when you meet, take this, no, I'm not talking about you. When you meet an office psychopath, when you meet somebody that's like, you're like, whoa, wow, they're not safe. You're just like, wow. We never want to be that person, right? And what I learned in prayer recently is when I sat in the cathedral recently, things came up. Things came up. I sat in the Melbourne Cathedral and I just had this strong sense of grief over my father who's been dead 12, 15 years. Just a grief about the lack of closeness in that relationship. Why does that matter? Because it had been unattended. I hadn't even thought about it. But when I sat in the stillness, things that I'd forgotten about that the Lord wanted to say, hey, there's something here. We need to just... Why this matters is because you need to be safe, loving, good people. And if you give time to prayer, the deepest currents of your heart will emerge over time and He will reveal where He wants to heal you so He can use you even more. But if you're so busy and you're never still, you will not hear those things. Is it not a coincidence, perhaps? We live in an incredibly therapeutic culture. Quote from Evelyn Underhill, I promise you're almost done. Listen to these words. As your meditation becomes deeper, it will defend you from the perpetual assaults of the outer world. You will hear the busy hum of that world as a distant exterior melody and know yourself to be in some sort withdrawn from it. You have set a ring of silence between you and it. And behold, within that silence, you are free. Lincoln is rumoured to have said, I have been driven to my knees more times than I can possibly remember by the overwhelming awareness that I had nowhere left to go. And you think of what he carried in the 1860s. I've been driven to my knees by the awareness that I had nowhere left to go. The sacraments, I just don't see how you could sustain a Catholic vocation not being embedded in the heart of the Church. The Second Vatican Council said the Church is the mother who gives birth to disciples. John of the Cross said she is the great mother who keeps the children together on the journey. So I just basically, I'm not that bright. I just found where the grace was and I just go there. So for me, I try to get to daily Mass, not because I'm pious, not because I want to impress anybody, but because I just figured out where the grace was. And every time I go there, He gives me something. He really does. He just gives me something. Every time I go, I get some idea, some insight, something every time. So I just keep going back. So I would encourage you to embed yourself deeply in the heart of the Church, deeply in her sacraments. Scripture, just a little bit of daily immersion in the Gospels. Just a little bit of daily immersion in the Gospels. Just to hear from Him each day, to encounter Him each day. I mentioned to you self-care. I could do a whole other presentation someday about that, but look after yourselves. We're almost finished. Look after yourselves, because if you break, it is not an extravagance to really Take care of yourselves. Do you see friends? Do you make time for friendship? Do you have a hobby? How's your health? These are, you see, I'm really fascinated by monastic traditions because the monks figured this out. They figured out a rhythm of life: work, sacrament, prayer, community, food. Look after yourselves, because it's hard to encounter Him if you're so emotionally and spiritually exhausted. So please today, consider how well you are looking after yourself. And finally, I wanted to leave you with one final idea, which is this. There's a lot going on in the world, many challenges, many difficulties, many struggles. Remember I said at the start of today, you only need to do one thing, which is to play your part. This is the church built over the original church built by St. Benedict of Nursia in the 6th century. Now remember, the Roman Empire officially collapsed in 476. And it was very much this church in Nursia that secured the patrimony of the faith. It held on to the doctrine. And from Nursia, it began to radiate back out through Europe. What's it got to do with you? Well, first point, it's a very small community. It was just a very small community of men and women and lay people and religious that shared a common mission and lived and worked together and re-evangelized Europe. And this is the monastery on the island of Iona in the Inner Hebrides, where in the 10th century, a tiny monastic community of men and women who were frequently being raided by Vikings lived together, prayed together, ministered together, and from there, saints like Aidan went back into Europe and evangelized the Pictish, the German tribes, and had a profound effect on Europe. This is Lindisfarne, the other island in the United Kingdom that also was a tiny little monastic community of men and women who read the Gospels, who prayed, who worshipped together, built community, and from there transformed Europe. So here's my point. At key moments in the history of the world and the history of the church, tiny little communities of men and women, of saints, have ended up doing the most remarkable things by just being faithful to where they were. Can you see a possibility here? Have you noticed where you spend each day? It may not look like that, but it doesn't look massively dissimilar. It's a little community of men and women focused on Christ, serving the world, and through that place the most remarkable things can happen. So do not lose sight of the incredible significance of what you are actually doing. You don't have to save the world. You just have to be faithful where you are. You have to encounter Christ and share His joy with the world. Well, hello one final time. Jonathan with you again here. I really hope you enjoyed that second video. I like to say to people that there really is nothing new under the sun. The practices that supported the influential Catholic communities of the early centuries of the Church's history, those practices are still the same sorts of things that we need to be thinking about day in and day out. Remember, it is not your job to sustain yourself in this vocation. If God's called you into it, then it's His job to sustain you in it. All we have to do is cooperate. So I really hoped you enjoyed these two videos. It was a real privilege working with the Archdiocese of St. Louis. Wonderful people doing really important work, and it was an absolute privilege to be invited by them and to work with them. There are links under here if you'd like to get in touch, if you'd like to find about how you can book me to speak. There'll be some information under here. I'd love you to share these videos if you found them helpful. But for now, thanks for what you're doing every single day for Catholic education, for young people, for their families, for the wider community. And I do hope that we get to meet in person sometime soon.